All right, thank you. And I appreciate you all coming out tonight. I'm Tom Skarowski. I'm the Chief of Planning and Community Development for the City of Revere. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know we're coming on the heels of a holiday weekend where a lot of folks had different activities going on, and it means a lot that you committed to coming out today to making time to talk with us about the future of Broadway in Revere. Just wanted to, before we get started, do a quick round of thank yous to the elected officials that are present. So we have Councilor Juan Jaramillo, Councilor Michelle Kelly, Councilor Robert Haas III, and Ward Councilor Paul Argenzio. Am I missing any of the city councilors? Okay, great. Thank you so much. And also want to give a special thank you, although she's not an elected official, when we're talking about the Broadway Business District. A really critical component of that is having a strong business organization and association here on Broadway. And I wanted to thank Erica Porzio. She's here. Oh, right in the front. Missed you. Thank you so much, Executive Director at the Chamber. We're going to need your leadership and support moving forward with this vision, so really appreciate you taking the time. And last but certainly not least, we've got Representative Jessica Giannino from the State House. Sorry, the glare is, I'm having trouble seeing folks here today. But thank you for coming out. And of course, Mayor Keefe, who of course before being the mayor for the city was ward councilor for this district. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that as a result of that, we've got a really strong advocate and a really strong leader who is going to help propel this work forward on Broadway moving forward. And we need strong leadership in that regard, and appreciate your support bringing us there, Mayor. So to talk today about, I guess I would need my PowerPoint. There we go. All right, the master planning process overall. I just wanted to also introduce the project team here. So on the city side, we have both myself, we have John Festa, our business liaison, Julie DeMoro, transportation manager, who I'm sure many of the folks in this room have seen. Both in the last year, they've been working on a sign and facade program throughout Broadway, but also in really the last decade, bringing a lot of the businesses together, a lot of the leadership work, really helping to focus small business resources onto Broadway, transportation, planning, and all of the wonderful things that they've been doing for a really long time here on Broadway, and I'm lucky to have them here to help support this effort. We're also joined by our team at Gamble & Associates, David Gamble and Antonio Medina Abel, which is our planning and design firm that's really leading the planning and design effort on our consultant side. And then we have Amy Fatter and John Tramontozzi from Landwise Associates, which are really leading a lot of the economic development and market study work behind this plan. And we're really grateful to have such a good team to help build this plan together. So to go through the overview of the presentation, we're going to start with some initial observations where I'm going to hand it over to David Gamble to talk about from kind of a planning and design perspective, what we see, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for lack of a better term, along Broadway. And then we'll dig into the market study and the Landwise team really talking through from a market perspective, what works, what doesn't, what are our opportunities and threats in the district. But following a quick round of presentations, we're then going to actually break up, and you see some different notepads and note cards set up at your tables where we really want to hear from you first and foremost about your vision for Broadway, because although we're leading the effort, it's really the folks in this room that are going to help drive the work forward. And then from that, we'll get back together and do a quick recap of the discussions that we had at our individual tables, and then we'll take a sneak peek at some of the initial work we've done. We're very early in the master planning stages, but some of the initial visioning and planning work, and set the stage for the next steps where we are from now until about fall in 2024, when we actually finalize and hopefully endorse by the City Council and the Mayor's Office this Broadway Master Plan. So that's things in a nutshell. Before we do get started, I want to do a quick public service announcement for both everybody here, but also folks watching on Revere TV, that we do have a survey that's live. Today is kind of the public launch we've had for the last couple weeks. It's been available. I think we have about 70 respondents thus far. It's available both in English and Spanish. And I would encourage you all, if you haven't already, to take the survey. And if you have, encourage your friends, your fellow business owners, anyone who really has a stake and an interest in the future of Broadway to take this survey. Tell us a little bit about what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see different. And ultimately, at the end of the survey, there's an opportunity to continue to stay engaged in this work, where you can tell us, if you want to be a part of future planning conversations, if you want to be a part of our newsletter, if you want to continue to have conversations with the city team about what we can do on Broadway moving forward. So please take the survey. Please encourage your friends, family, colleagues to take the survey as well, because ultimately we want to hear from everybody here tonight. So in terms of what a master plan is and what it isn't, we often hear a lot of questions from folks about what exactly it is we're doing. So it's important to clarify, a master plan is really a vision for future development of Broadway. It's a broad vision. It's really a flexible framework to identify priorities and investments. It's a policy guide for decision making and a way to address issues such as zoning, housing, land use, and transportation. What it is not is a really rigid, static document that will be implemented as drawn. Just because we have it on the plan doesn't mean everything's going to happen, and nor is it a plan for how the city is going to purchase property and redevelop it. It's really, as it's stated there, more of a framework for development moving forward. And ultimately, it's not the type of change that's going to happen quickly. We're thinking long-term here in this plan. We want to see things in the short term get accomplished, but we're really building towards 10 to 20-year vision for this work. So I ask you all to be patient. I ask you all to be curious and really work with us in these discussions to think about what you want to see on Broadway moving forward, because again, this vision is really about all of us. So I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to hand it over to David and his team.
Thanks, Tom. Can you all hear me okay? Great. And thanks, Julie and John, that we've been working with. I had not been to Revere, although most of our clients are cities and municipalities around the Commonwealth. And about a year and a half ago, we got introduced to some business owners along both Broadway and Shirley Avenue that were looking to redevelop their facades. The city had received some funds. And I have to say, in 25 years of practice, it was one of the most enjoyable processes I've experienced, because not only did we work individually with the property owners, but we helped to evaluate ways in which the individual facades could be redeveloped with paint and signs, and sometimes removing things as much as adding things. And I think you're going to see over the course of the next year quite a few of these willing property owners or even tenants make small-scale interventions into their elevations, their facades, that in aggregate are going to make a real big difference. So if we've had the pleasure of working with you, that's great. If not, we'll probably do so in the future. This effort is really looking at the corridor writ large, from end to end, over a mile long. And Revere is lucky, actually, to have such a long, largely commercial, but mixed-use corridor along its length. This will be a conversation. It's not a lecture. If you came for a 45-minute lecture, I'm going to disappoint you. So just a couple quick initial observations that we have as urban designers and planners. We work mostly with cities, and urban revitalization is sort of our niche. So we were looking at your corridor, and it has some strong anchors. This will be hard to see from a distance. I think you know your city, but in most of the maps, north is up. So it is looking at Broadway. Many of the lots are fairly shallow. That is to say, they don't go really deep. But there are a few sites along the length of Broadway, actually right outside this door, more or less in the center of the corridor, that are a little bit bigger. I'm speaking specifically about the two pharmacies there. So as a master plan goes, if you think about new development, there aren't a ton of sites for that to happen. But our role was to try to think about what are the assets in the corridor and how do you begin to improve it over time in strategic locations. So it's important to know that a city's most vibrant public spaces actually tend to be streets. And you've got a pretty interesting one. That Broadway is fairly narrow. It took me about 20 minutes to get here from Chelsea because it's so popular. But there are a lot of business along its length. The great streets are green. They tend to be memorable. They are representative and can be models for other communities. Your street is actually asking to do a little bit too much. There's a lot of things attached to things, light poles and banners, and in some ways you almost want to pull out and remove some of the, I don't want to say clutter, but some of the things that have accrued over time, and let this really be a commercial corridor in and of itself, leveraging really the bulk of the businesses along its length. I can't remember, John will say specifically how many businesses there are, but it's pretty uncommon amongst your peer cities and towns to have that many what we call front doors. Every about 20 to 30 feet, you want to have a front door to a business, and that makes a difference. So let's look at some of these. You've got iconic buildings. You see this from a distance. You've got a strong sense of history. We spent a day immersed in your historical center. It has a lot of building diversity, and by that we mean different scales and different time periods. And first and foremost, it's got a lot of great people. And these people are invested, some of you are here, invested in its transformation. These were some of the one-on-one conversations we had. But alas, I'm not going to say everything's rosy. You've got some sites that are a little harsh. There's surface parking, especially as you head north on the corridor. It gets sort of breaks down quickly as a corridor. A lot of asphalt, unfortunately. And some sites, again, I don't mean to pick on pharmacies that we all frequent for many different reasons, but they do have, your corridor breaks down along the portion of the corridor that's maybe most significant because it's really it's in the valley. You come down the hills on both sides and then you're here in the middle. This was some of the things we talked about. Your light poles are asked to do a lot. There's banners and celebrations and parking things, and it's just, those are some of the things in the public realm that you want to simplify. You want to take them away. You want to find other locations for them because it's really the public realm. That's the city's responsibility from property line to property line. That's what a city can control. And then private property owners are, of course, dealing with their facades and their buildings. There isn't a town green in a formal sense of the word. If you think about a New England open space, it's really almost a mile long before you have a little relief, of course, that the VFW do. Pharmacies are going through a radical alteration nationwide, globally, with more online shopping. Many pharmacies are doing about 70% of their business with the actual pharmacy itself as opposed to the goods. That's transforming. And so if we just zoom out a little bit, this rectangle here, this orange rectangle, we're going to reorient that. So north, in this case, is to the right. You're seeing the roundabout there on one side. And we just want to we want to show a few maps to give you a sense of that. You've got a gateway into Chelsea under the bridge, and then you've got the roundabout, and then here, so we are right here, more or less in the midpoint, and you also have the two schools, which is also pretty unique. It's great to be here. Thank you for allowing us to use the space, but it's pretty uncommon for a city to have two schools within walking distance to your main commercial corridor. And we know that the high school is there, and there's other alternatives for that, but there are hundreds and hundreds of students that are crossing that path on a daily basis. Of course, Broadway once was public transit with light rail or with the trolleys. Now there is a bus there, but the corridor had a history of public transit, including, again, I am picking on Walgreens, where the barn used to be for the trolleys was right there. I don't think any of you are old enough to remember that, are you? Okay. If you were, you wouldn't admit it, right? This is kind of a complex map, but those blue and green lines represent topographic change. And so if you think about the hills on either side, and these, I'm worried to sort of be in touch with this, this line, those two lines actually seem to create almost 3 corridors. So one observation we have tonight, and we'd like you to refute this or support it, is that Broadway in and of itself is almost too long to think of it as one length. In other words, you're unlikely to walk from the roundabout to the bridge. And there's almost a center section, which is where we are, a southern section towards City Hall, and then a northern section. And each of those might have their own specific strengths. So south, central, and north. So that's observation number one. We think Broadway might have unique characteristics in these three sections. And so therefore, in some of the branding and wayfinding work we've been doing, we think that that's an opportunity. We know people have a hard time finding where the parking lot is. Some of the congestion might be relieved if it's clear where you can go to park. And so these little discs represent one way to start to think about the three sections there. There are quite a few auto-dependent sites, that is to say gas stations and service stations, especially as you move north. That adds one of the characteristics to that section as you head north. And historically, when we were doing our mapping, you know, it was interesting to see where the trolleys came into on this section. So it's always been a place of connectivity along Broadway. And in this map, if we just look at the pink line, it's focusing specifically on that trajectory. This is from the 1947 transit map. Next. And lo and behold, in the historical documentation, there is a trolley going just outside of our door here with a fire station in the background. How many people of you knew that that was the case, that there was a trolley barn there and the rail line came in there? Raise your hand if that was, okay, maybe half a dozen. What does that mean for the future? Well, I don't know, but it's interesting to note that that site was a key transportation node in the past. And for those people who think it's too far to walk from my parking spot to my business or my restaurant, we just overlaid the South Shore, North Shore Mall. And, you know, Macy's to JCPenney's goes, you know, almost entirely through that section. So when we think about, well, parking at a mall, look at the depth. If the light pink is the parking lot and the dark pink is the mall, you know, just think of that distance. So as a culture, I think we're not used to walking as much as we used to, and the most vibrant commercial centers actually require a little bit of that. Next. And then we also looked at Revere Beach, and many of you probably run along its length. That's a very big arc, which really goes from side to side. Next. So the good news is there's a lot to work with. If you think about a Broadway master plan, there isn't wholesale demolition. There's a lot of businesses that are up to the street. They do the right thing. There's housing coming in. You're relatively close proximity to the beach. The hills and the geography starts to define the city. And as part of our work with the city, economic consultants have done a more fine-grained analysis of the businesses along Broadway. And John is going to talk a little bit about that because it is another one of your strengths, actually, is having that much commercial and food and beverage.
Thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Trementozzi with Landwise. We're a small real estate advisory firm in the Boston area. And really our role is to bring sort of a market and economic perspective to the master planning process. So tonight I just want to share with you a few things about what we're seeing in terms of existing conditions and some things to think about for the group breakout sessions. So there you go. So for the first thing, you know, with e-commerce, right? Amazon, other online retailers, right, have totally changed the retail kind of landscape over the last 5 and 10 years. Folks can get pretty much anything they want delivered to their front door, and so it changes the behavior. And really, for main streets like Broadway, that's had a couple impacts, right? The first is that a lot of the spaces have gone into food, right? People still have to go out and get food at lunchtime, at dinner time. Not everything can be takeout, and so food has really taken over a larger percentage of the main street space. The second thing is about kind of experiential retail, right? Not just shopping, not just eating, but what other sort of entertainment and kind of vibrant activities can you pair with it that'll get people out to want to be there, whether it's festivals, concerts, food markets, that kind of thing. So really, those are increasingly part of the retail scene. work from home has changed things, right? People spending more days working from home or in a hybrid kind of situation, and that's really benefited suburban areas more than kind of urban downtown areas. Broadway's probably somewhere in between. And then the last thing I want to point out is just kind of health and wellness is another big aspect, right? So in addition to food, a lot of sort of the health and wellness, whether it's yoga, whether it's exercise, whether it's spa, whatever it might be, a lot of those kind of new retail concepts have come in and sort of found their homes in Main Street type environments. Go to the next. So a couple things to think about. So big things that have occurred over the past 5 years, kind of along the lines of what I was just saying. For Main Streets to be healthy and vibrant and active, they need to bring more than just shopping, right? So for the first side here, elements to delight. So this idea that public art and kind of aesthetically interesting things will bring people out and bring a certain interest to the district that creates a vibrancy. Opportunities to convene goes back to the programming idea, right? What other things are going to bring people out, whether it's markets, whether it's a farmer's market, whether it's concerts, things that are exciting, things that are sort of program-based events that can pair with dining and shopping. And then finally, greening and activation, right? The idea that it's not just the shops, but it's the physical spaces, whether it's a plaza, it's open space, it's outdoor seating, it's giving parking spaces over to outdoor dining on occasion, things of that nature that people can get excited about. Those are things we've seen succeed. So we spent a decent amount of time sort of walking the corridor, talking with retailers, trying to get people to fill out the survey. So please do fill out the survey if you have a minute. And a couple things that we've observed. So on the strength side, things that are working really well. You have a beautiful two-sided Main Street, right? You've got shops on both sides of the street. For the most part of the corridor, it's fairly walkable. It's comfortable. It's safe. And so that's a real strength. Not every street is designed that way. You've got a lot of eclectic businesses, locally owned businesses, diverse businesses, lots of different food options. Those are all things that are really strong. You've got existing buildings, right? A wide variety. It's not all new construction, really expensive rents. You've got, some buildings that are lower rents and maybe more obtainable for people who might want to start a new business. And so those are all things that are great and should be celebrated, we should be happy about. The vacancy is also fairly low. So those are all good. On the weaknesses side, we don't see a lot of new concepts coming out, right? Like when we talk to people, they kind of say, well, we'd like this, we'd like that, we'd like to see a little more innovation in the retail area. We think maybe there's some new concepts that could come into this street. And so that's something to think about as we go through this planning process. I think also some of the weaknesses that we're seeing are about the physical environment. A lot of the things that David talked about, right? There's not a lot of places to kind of linger and hang out along the street. So if you're out grabbing lunch, talking with folks, walking around a bit, there's not, a lovely piazza to sit in and hang out, take a phone call, eat your lunch, whatever it might be. We think there could be more of that. That's something we've heard from folks so far. This idea that, maybe using design to make the street a little more accessible, a little more vibrant is something to explore. Go ahead. And so the weaknesses become the opportunities, right? So some of those ideas about improving mobility, creating a better public realm, creating more spaces for people to linger and interact with other folks, creating better spaces for programmed events. If you want to have concerts or farmers markets, movie on the green, that kind of thing, are there places to do it on a consistent basis? And then threats, right? There's always going to be a newer, shinier, more exciting retail district, no matter where you are, right? So you're always going to be concerned that folks they could be shopping here, but they're going somewhere else because they've got the newest, best, hottest restaurants, right? That's always the case. So there's going to be competition, and you just have to do your best to compete with it. And then the last part is about e-commerce. That's also a threat that's not going away. So you have to make the physical spaces more exciting. So a series of slides here. We kind of crunched a lot of numbers, looked at a lot of data to see who was in the district and what some of the trends were. So this first one is about people working along the Broadway corridor. You're probably not going to be able to read it, so I'll try to just give you the summary here. So basically, in addition to the businesses we were just talking about, the restaurants, the retailers, there's other folks working here too. So the yellow dots, for example, are public administration. So you've got City Hall, you've got fire department, you've got some other sort of public entities that are working in the corridor and are here every day. You also have other small businesses. You've got finance, you've got insurance, you've got other small businesses that are shopping and supporting retailers along the street. So that's all positive. You want that daytime employment, particularly to support the daytime spending and the lunch hour business. If you didn't have all this employment, you wouldn't have as many restaurants. So residents are important, but so are workers. We also looked at data on income and home prices. So again, you're not going to be able to see this entirely, but the median household income in the city of Revere is just shy of $80,000. That's the median. And what we see is that along the corridor, you've got folks, different census tracts that are both above and below that. So you've got some census tracts that are kind of in the $50,000 to $75,000 range, and then on both the north and southern portions of Broadway, in that really dark color there, folks with household incomes over $100,000. So it's actually fairly diverse in terms of incomes as well. And then home prices. So a tapestry of different purple colors here. The most sort of prominent and range is sort of the 400 to 600,000. That's mainly what you're seeing along the corridor. A few areas have prices higher than that, kind of in the $600,000 to $800,000 range. So a little bit of a diversity, but not a lot of affordable housing outside of a few particular properties. Next. In terms of diversity, Revere overall is fairly diverse. You're just shy of 40% of the population identifying as a race other than white. And so in this area, it's pretty consistent with the city overall. That kind of yellow color that you're seeing along the corridor is 20 to 40% minority population. So just about 40% along the corridor. So also diverse from a race perspective. So like I mentioned, we spent time walking the corridor. We looked at every single business. The map on the left sort of shows all of the different buildings color-coded by retail category. So we did a full inventory of everything at the ground level. And what you see, hopefully you can read that chart, but essentially the green is what we call personal service. So that's hair salons, nail salons, things of that nature, pharmacy. The brown color, when it comes back up, is automotive services. That's the next highest, along with grocery and specialty foods and restaurants. So those are the four biggest categories. So red is restaurants, orange is grocery and specialty foods, and brown is automotive. So overall, I would say, we do this all over the country. I would say this is a very diverse mix. Restaurants may be a little bit lower than what we see in other places, with personal service being a little bit higher than what we typically see. So if you want to get your hair cut or your nails done, this is definitely the place to do it. You've got lots of options. So that's great. If you go to the next one. So just thinking about an overall count of businesses. So 35 personal service businesses, 24 restaurants, 22 grocery and specialty food shops, so on and so forth. So you've got a lot of choice here. The question is, are there things that are missing in the market? We'll ask you that later on tonight. With all this diversity of businesses, what's lacking? Are there places that could be either a better anchor that's really going to drive more activity, or is it a retail category that's not represented at all along this corridor? We'd ask you to think about that and sort of bring your ideas. We'll tell you later on in the process kind of what we think from a data perspective, but we want to hear first from you in terms of what you all desire. And then just to kind of round it out here, we want to do this in the context of the market and what's happening, both publicly and privately from a redevelopment perspective. And so we are trying to track either recently completed or planned projects in the district and try to understand how that's going to affect future change. For example, the McKinley School reuse project, we know that's something that's coming up that folks are thinking about, could drive more activity, could sort of change the nature of the corridor. And so that's something that will infuse into the thinking. The high school moving, obviously it's a long-term thing, but that will change the nature of the corridor, right? Especially post-school hour, you've got a lot of kids kind of filtering through the district and supporting businesses. That does change things a bit. So we'll try to incorporate all of that into the thinking here. So just to round it all out here, just a couple initial observations from our kind of early work. Vacancy very low along the corridor, so 4% of the space is vacant. Typically, we say anything less than 10% is healthy. So whether you like the district or not, it is very well occupied. There are not a lot of empty spaces. You're going to have turnover, you're going to have change, that always happens, but the space is well occupied, and that's a positive. Personal service, as I mentioned, very high here with all the kind of hair and nail type of places, as well as spas and pharmacies. That can change over time, but it's very high at the moment. A lot of restaurants and bars, specialty food, that's a strength. Particularly specialty food is, it's hard to get those kind of retailers in sort of new construction space. So that's something to hopefully hold on to, and those kind of businesses will hopefully continue to flourish along the corridor. And then I guess I'll say the last thing I'll say is that a quarter of the space is still residential along the corridor, so it's not all retail or commercial. That's something that's happened over time. As some spaces turn over, they've maybe been retail at one point and then they're residential at another point. Something to think about in the process. There is additional space if it was desired to have additional retail. And then finally, we want to hear from you. Community input is really critical. Please take the survey. I think we're 70. We're up to 70 something. So hopefully by the end of tonight we'll be over 100. So please fill it out if you can, and look forward to chatting with some of you after the presentation. So thanks.
Thanks, John. Look, we're right on time, and actually it's the perfect number of participants. So there's 42 people here, not including the city and the consultants. We have 7 tables. We would like 6 people at 7 tables, it's 42, and each table is going to be assigned a facilitator, but we're just going to listen. So for the next 25 minutes, we would like a table of 6 people to gather around, and we want you to think big picture, the future of the corridor. What is the future vision? You're going to answer these 6 questions, okay? With each table, there's someone that's taking notes from what everyone says, and each table is going to be assigned someone to report back to the rest of us. So whoever speaks most loudly or clearly, we're asking each table to identify someone that can report back what that table said, and we're going to aggregate the comments together, okay? So if your table has a big white sheet of paper, please get 6 people around it, and we're going to then assign someone to come. You've got 25 minutes to answer these questions, okay?
Counted. They can tell how much revenue each meter,
What modes of transportation do we need access to? Modes of transportation, and also what additional businesses could you envision along the corridor or activities?
I heard a lot of great things at my table, at table number 6. And I'm sure throughout all the different tables as people are wandering around, a lot of common themes that I'm seeing. And I think what's most exciting from what I heard today is there's also a lot of things that are really connected to what we're ultimately going to be talking about later tonight, but also some of the initial ideas that we had going through this master planning process. I think sometimes we need to have a check to make sure we're kind of on the right path. And from the things that I'm hearing tonight, it seems like not only are we on the right path, but you guys are going to help us forge along a better one. So I appreciate the great conversation today. Before we hand the mic around the different tables for folks to share what they learned, I did want to thank a few more elected officials that have joined us this evening. We have Councilor Zambuto, Councilor Silvestri, and Council President Cogliandro. Appreciate you all coming out. And School Committee Member Stacy Rizzo, thank you for joining us as well. I covered the rest earlier. Thank you, I appreciate it. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'm going to hand it to David to go around the room with the mic.
All right, I didn't say this at the beginning, but thank you for your time. It's precious and it matters. And this conversation is going to set the framework by which, when we come back, we're going to ask you if what we are showing is consistent with what the overall themes were in these tables. So I'm going to start in table 7. Someone in table 7 is going to report back the big picture stuff, 5 minutes maximum. Big picture stuff that table discussed, even if it's not, even if people didn't agree. In fact, if you didn't agree, that's even more important to hear. And then we're going to go work backwards from 7 down to 1. So who is a spokesperson here? And just keep the mic as close to your mouth as you can.
All right, well, I was facilitating this table. I'm from one of the consulting teams, but I'll give a quick rundown from my table. We had lots of support for public space. People love the high-level activity on Broadway today, the fact that their businesses have a low vacancy rate and diversity.
I'm sorry, can you get the mic a little bit closer?
Hello? Okay. Yeah, so people like, sorry, what's that? Oh, sorry. The open space and the diversity of businesses. In terms of future vision, there was some pushback against parking meters, and maybe we can rethink some of the parking pricing. There was support for more public art, some identified opportunities. People like the banners and the flags and all the things that give the street character. As far as barriers, people identified, wanting to see more public engagement and workshops like we have tonight, as well as cost. For public space, people definitely supported that and want more of it. They see new developments and sites that are getting redeveloped as good opportunities for that. And let's see, they would be looking for places that have combination of open air and sheltered spaces. As far as transportation, the consensus was buses are pretty good. There's not necessarily a need to improve. Scooters were identified as a potential safety concern. And then walking in severe weather was identified as a concern. So there's the idea for more street trees and awning to create shade. As far as new businesses activities, we had the idea for more cocktail lounges and places where there can be local musicians, potentially a stage area incorporated into public space, as well as perhaps a pop-up area for things like local artists and vendors and food trucks. So that's my quick rundown.
All right, so what we wanted to see, kind of our best case vision, was we wanted to see a lot of improvement in green space areas to meet kind of where the public realm can really be maximized and where people can just exist without having to think about necessarily having to spend money, but they can spend money when they want and they can increase the economic development across the city. We also want some more restaurants, but we also want a lot of landscaping, increasing of street trees, but we also want to be very pollinator friendly, so not necessarily just have regular grass along maybe the sidewalks, look at plants that really increase pollination and bees and all that great stuff. We also wanted a really big focus on pedestrian friendly development, just because in reality, a lot of these businesses were built for people walking along the sidewalks. They weren't necessarily built on the predication that people are driving and parking and going to store and just waiting on parking. It was really based on pedestrian friendliness. Some barriers, we saw a lot of barriers with traffic, and there's not a lot of opportunity to divert traffic just because Broadway is such a big pass-through road, coming from Chelsea, then going to, I think it's Brown Circle, right? Going out to Lynn and Saugus. So there's a lot of barriers that way, where just because it's such a big pass-through road, diverting traffic is a large challenge. Also, there's some problems with public transit, just because we don't have necessarily dedicated bus lanes or bike lanes. They're only from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. They're cut off with on-street parking, so they're not really utilized in the best way. Also, they don't necessarily have the best frequency, so that's not really kind of inviting a lot of people to use it all the time as a mode of transportation other than to and from work. We have to look at people wanting to take transportation, public transportation, for more than just commuting. We want to take it for getting to businesses and getting back to and from businesses. We also wanted to see improvement with well-lit walkways off of Broadway. While there's a lot of good lighting along Broadway, immediately off Broadway, it kind of goes a lot of times into kind of single-family residential neighborhoods that aren't necessarily well-lit. Specifically, we're thinking from the municipal parking lot. There's not a lot of well-lit areas, so we want to see improvement in that. More easily accessible parking. We aren't really sure how that should go, and I think that needs to be a large citywide conversation, just because it's so nuanced. Obviously we need parking, but how do we best maximize it to kind of decrease congestion and decentivize from people wanting to just drive everywhere? And then a little quick kind of fantasy idea that we had was kind of looking back on our history, that we are a primarily streetcar neighborhood. We're built upon the streetcar. We want to look maybe to get back to that and create a trolley that would go from one side of Broadway across these three different, the south, the north, and the central corridors, and kind of create I'm trying to think of the word, streamlined and dedicated way to get from one end to the other so people aren't necessarily having to walk that full mile or drive it either. And then some things that we want to see just on business side, we want to look at like a FedEx/UPS, Amazon type drop off or pick up or return kind of store. Street facing cafes, maybe a brewery if you're into that, kind of something that also gets outdoor, so maybe doors that go across. There's a lot of examples of that kind of down the beach, just maximizing using street dining. And then also prioritize, as we said in the start, non-paying spots where people are allowed to exist and gather just because they want to and not necessarily because they want to spend money. And that's a lot of what we did.
Great, thank you. A trolley down Broadway, that is ambitious. It's a sobering thought to think that cities, American cities, were maybe most vibrant in the 90s, the 1890s, because that is actually when the streetcars evolved. That's how your city evolved along that axis.
That was a great presentation because that we're going to piggyback a lot on that. I think you're going to hear that common theme tonight. It said to be ambitious, look outside the box. That's great because that's really what has to happen, and then whittle it down from there and see what's can be realistic or not. Aesthetically pleasing. That was the big thing that came out of here. More trees, more greenery. Just imagine no cars on Broadway at all, no parking. Then you could extend all the sidewalks of every business out further. Some could be further than others. You could have some for benches, and people say, okay, well, we'll have benches and parking. Well, we need to have security. Okay, well, then we can have the police doing the walking along Broadway, and the bikes, and then the parking garages. To keep it safe, to make this a vibrant, walkable, every night, any time of the night type of city. I know there's a lot of work to be done, but why not? If you're looking outside the box, why not? So grassy areas, parking is a big thing. You talked about parking garages and where's everyone going to park? Well, I know they're going to be redoing the bridges down there, 16. There's a lot of greenery along that area down there, along that roadway that could be better utilized than just, I know it's nice to have the greenery there, but we have a parking issue. So why not park there? Develop some parking all around that new project. What are some of the barriers maybe to the signage and up and down Broadway? Well, it seems like some people are willing to change the signs and make it look better, and some are not. Some people just want to leave it alone, and it all looks the same. When you're driving down, it all kind of looks the same because there's cars parked all the way along, and the signage looks very much the same. So come up with some new ideas to maybe be creative on the signage to make it more accessible. Transportation, we have the busway and the bikeway. We're back to the parking, we're back to the cars, we're back to the clogging of the street. We want to make it walkable. The cars seem to be the elephant in the room where they have to be dealt with some way, and how do we do it? Yes, we want more green space and more open space wherever viable, but I think that'll be a completion of when we deal with the parking and how we make more greenery, more spaces, that type of thing. So we have less bus and bike lanes. That kind of ties in with the parking, I guess. It all kind of ties into one major thing we have here. And what additional business? I'm not sure. I heard the idea of a brewery. That would be great. So places, that's always a good thing, no matter where we go. More restaurants, more different restaurants? Absolutely. We're a tavern, but we love competition. We'd like to have 10 taverns up and down Broadway. That just makes more, guess what, more people are coming. If you have more of a diverse, eclectic food and beverage operation, more people are going to come. It's going to be a destination, not just for Revere, but for the five towns around it, so that people are going to come.
Thank you. That is true. You really want a critical mass. You want more things closer together that gives people options. That is an ingredient of successful cities. Who on this table? Chamber President.
Executive Director, and I'd be glad to. I'll stand up. I don't know if anyone can see this, so I don't want you to tire your arms for that, but no, that's okay. I'll read it, make sure that everybody... so let's see. Well, first off, what came from our table was how we envision the future. And I know that some of the first opinions were, as far as the corridor, let's keep it commercial with regard to whether or not we should have more residential there or if it should still exist. So I believe our consensus from our team was that this would be huge to keep it commercial. And those strong feelings come from the fact that we need to mitigate the current traffic issue, which is, redundant, but true. Revere's culture. This is something that is more sociological perspective, but it comes in play. We are in a very special time in history where we had certain demographics within this area, and what we're seeing is a generational change. And I know community development knows this better than anyone else because this is what we actually need to figure out. So before I go further, I just want to second a few things. Table 6, Table 7, we couldn't agree more with you. Gentleman over here as well, that we need to cut down on, let's see, well, we need to eliminate the clutter, we agree with that. Brighten the lights, right, so that people can see what's going on, but also from a traffic perspective, as you're driving, it's not just the walkways. The street lights aren't that dark. As you said, there's a whole residential aspect behind even the VFW. It's not lit up. When I walk my dog, I don't know if a car's coming or not. So things like that. But moving forward, how can we make this better? Well, increase transparency. Coming from some of our longtime residents, we don't want to see bars on windows. We want to see more. We want to see better facade. And I know that community development is working really hard to make that happen. So that's great because I feel like we're all on the same page. We don't want rundown buildings. And I must admit, the older buildings, while they're beautiful and they have good reason, they don't make sense because nothing seems to match around here. And that goes with the uniform. We're a very mixed demographic, and we have to figure out a way that we can hang on to the generation that we have that gives so much tradition and beauty to the city, but also open up to the fact that we are a mixed demographic, and that's what makes us beautiful too. And I think alleviating segregation is by bringing together people with communal space. We agree with greenery. There should be more communal space. I couldn't agree more. We need newer concepts. We have to attract the newer generation, but we also have to appease the other generations and find a way that we can all come together and conform. The only way to do that as a community is to be a community and not segregate where some of us go to certain stores and others don't because it doesn't reflect our backgrounds. We have a background of Revere together, no matter if we grew up in the city over or not, or our grandparents and parents are from here. I grew up in Peabody, I'm sorry. But the point is, I did grow up here, and I know that I'd like to see some more uniform in this community, and I think it begins with having more communal space and respect to the people that have been here for a long time. So, did that get everything? Okay, cool, thank you. Yes. Yeah, did everyone hear that? So, please.
I just want to speak on behalf of the residents whose homes directly abut Broadway and everything that we've had to deal with the intrusion of the central business district. Me personally, we discussed it here, I don't want to see any convening spaces. I don't want to have to deal with more people congregating 20 feet from my house at all times of the day and night. I just want to speak on behalf of the people who live in homes that abut Broadway.
I think that's an important point to call out. There are some tensions here, right? An active commercial corridor directly adjacent to people's homes. So you want the corridor well lit. Well, not if you're a resident. We talk about convenience spaces for residents or for abutters. That's a nuisance. So you need to do it in smart ways that give buffer zones and acknowledge the reality that the corridor is really well defined, closely defined, sometimes by 5 feet by an adjacent house. So it's just something one has to work with. Great, let's give it up for table 4. Table 3. Go blue.
Go Mission. But yeah, so we want you to hold that sign over there. All right, I'll stand over here so that
I'm not in anyone's way as we can see it. So over at our table, we had a lot of agreements and also a lot of kind of disagreements on this one. So I'll try to run down this as best I can. One of the first things that came up was it was something that we thought was interesting. It's like when you're either walking or driving along the quarter of Broadway, there's a lot of confusion and just like a lot of randomness towards like the buildings and just like the design aspect of it. So I think one thing that we agreed to was just having a little bit more conformity, not necessarily having every building look the same. That's not what we want, but also just like, because we love that variety that Revere has to offer, but maybe just like a balance of the two, where we have variety, but also in a way that there's some order to it. Let's see, one of the concerns that someone brought up at the table was we have some sanitation, some trash issues, especially along towards the park along the VFW. There's a lot of homeless people that are living underneath bridges, and it's not the most welcoming. Let's see what else we got here. I might just skip around a little bit out of order. One thing that I think we agreed to was more trees along the quarter, because personally I've walked along here along the summertime. I don't know if any of you guys have walked along the quarter in the summer. It gets really, really, really hot in the summer. It's not welcoming. It's not inviting. And it's just, we have a lot of asphalt and just a whole bunch of cars just like idling, at red lights, just stuck in traffic. That's not exactly helping a lot, trying to make the the area more inviting and cool to just sit around and hang out. But let's see, what else do we have on here? We have let's see. Oh, one cool idea that we had on here was to have like more of a historical themed idea. Like someone mentioned that like the fact that we're called Revere, but we don't have a statue of Paul Revere anywhere in the building. So I thought that was just kind of ironic that we don't have that. Now, as far as transportation is concerned, this is kind of where we kind of have like some different opinions on this one, because we definitely see a lot of cars just passing along through here. And when you do have a lot of cars that are just driving through, it kind of takes away from creating the sense of a place here along Broadway. I mean, personally, for example, I rode my bike here just to throw that out there, and there was just a whole bunch of cars that was just basically just sitting in traffic, and it was just kind of nice, just me just being able to just whiz right along by that. But I understand that going towards the future, I mean, the way that the city and the state is going, you definitely see a lot more people on bikes going around here. So I feel like it's a place that we want to make that's more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. But I also, don't want to be completely ignorant and understand, to try to understand what people's needs are now. And so people do need parking because, there are people here that can't walk far distances, that, can't ride bicycles or whatever it may be. So understand that, we do still want to have, some level of parking. We kind of have a disagreement as to where that parking should be, because personally I don't necessarily think that there should be a ton of parking along the main quarter itself. We have a bunch of municipal parking that goes near the quarter that people can then make a short walk over to. But yeah, that was one thing that we kind of weren't necessarily on the same page about, do we build a parking garage that's off the main quarter, that's nearby, that people can walk by, not 100% sure. And let's see, as far as new developments along the building, there was a support for beer gardens, ice cream shops, a YMCA for kids and teenagers, and a new senior center. We definitely had one president at our group, definitely a banger fest on the table for a new senior center. So yeah, that's what we had on our table.
Thank you very much. I thought that was great, and I'm from Ohio, but you're from Michigan. That's fine. No problem. No problem. All right. We're right on time, but if the next two tables, if you're underscoring what someone else said, just mention that, and then we can, we're going to wrap up with Tom after the last table.
Thank you. So decisions are made by those who show up, so I'm really glad to see everyone here attending tonight, and there's been incredible ideas, and I think what we're hearing is also what we've talked about is the city's needs to lean into pocket parks. Pocket parks cover your canopies, your green space, your places to sit. They're a way to improve not only for residents, but for people conducting business or kids getting off the bus or walking home from school. But more importantly is there's land ready to go right now within walking distance or on Broadway that we can use. So for example, the corner of East Mountain Ave and School Street, the green space in front of City Hall, the McKinley School basketball court, Osceola Court, or parking space conversions. But all of this fits under the Pocket Park umbrella, and it hits on everything that I've heard tonight from each of these tables, including supporting our residents and giving them more green space and a higher quality of life next to their house. And then to keep it original, we did, although I do want to say a Paul Revere statue or some sort of landmark statue came up in our group, so good job, that we love that. But we touched upon programming and events. One thing that this district could use is a special event master plan, or a programming master plan that incorporates both the stadium, because we have two semi-pro teams and one professional team, the Boston Renegades, that play there. We have, Fisher College was out there earlier with their lacrosse, but we would look to coordinate the events we're doing and why we're doing it, and then what we're doing at the events to not only generate more economic impact, but to protect our residents, to make sure we're doing the events for the right reasons, and then to tie them all together so that they're not operating independently of each other or independent of other city departments. And then finally, we talked about a lot, but a splash pad comes to mind for the neighborhood, not necessarily Broadway itself, but this is a neighborhood that can't always get to the beach, and even the beach represents somebody as a toddler father. It's not the best place to always take kids, but Everett, Chelsea, a lot of these urban communities have splash pads, and we do not. And there's an opportunity there to better this corridor. Again, support our businesses, support our residents, and fill a gap that's needed.
Well, thank you very much, and we want to commend everybody. Had some great ideas from all the different tables. Mixed-use development and residential. I know table 4, I think, spoke against, they want more commercial development, no residential. We think transit-oriented development, a couple of floors of residents that live right on Broadway, that would be able to activate Broadway, go to the businesses within walking distance. We thought that was a great idea. Zach from the parking department built a parking garage at the Central Ave lot that would be able to reduce the parking on Broadway, widen out the sidewalks, create spaces where restaurants can sit outside. Right now, we can't do that because the sidewalks are so narrow. Obviously, we want to increase green space. Everyone said that. We think the Legion lawn, the Veterans Park, is underutilized right now. We did have a, what do you call it? The thing on Friday. The farmer's market there, it was removed and moved someplace else. We think that could be better utilized. Some of the barriers that we saw, most of the property is privately owned along Broadway. There's a lot of gas stations, which really doesn't lend itself to a good business district. We thought about changing zoning in the future so that some of these things, like a gas station, maybe would be discouraged from being built. Let's see, what else? Transportation. Obviously, we don't think scooters is a good idea. There's some hotels that are being developed. Maybe make the hotels, or ask them to make Broadway a shuttle stop. So as we get more hotels, we can get people from these hotels right onto Broadway through a shuttle service. Open space. There's a spot at the corner of School Street and Broadway that, as Charlie talked about, pocket parks. That would be a great idea, and that could be a spot for one of those. City Hall lot. If we did have a parking garage, maybe you could take the City Hall lot, make that a little bit more welcoming, add some green space in there. And I think that's about it. Good.
This was great, actually. You've given us a lot to digest, and that's what our next goal is, to digest it. We're going to come back, ask you if we got it right. If we didn't, we want to know how to do it better. We're going to try to find a location for these things and draw them in ways that are easily discernible. Julie will scold me if you don't make sure you sign in the sheet in the back. We need to get everybody's contact information. I'm going to turn it to Tom. And then Stephanie's going to hand out, we have posters from this work we did with the businesses, the facade guidelines, and maybe we'll drop off one or two at each table if you haven't seen them.
Great, thank you, David. So I know I mentioned we are going to give you a sneak peek about some of the initial findings of the master plan, but I hate to break it to you, but we're going to have to keep you in suspense. As you've seen with some of the issues we've had with the presentation, I think there's a lot of exciting momentum that we've started to build here. I do want to touch on just a couple things that we are doing in the city right now and that we will be doing with this master plan, and then what the next steps are for how you all can continue to stay engaged in this work. One thing I mentioned did not mention at the outset that I should have, and I heard it in almost every table, were discussions about parking. And we have Katrina here from Stantec, and Katrina is helping to lead an effort that we're undertaking as a part of this work to do a Broadway parking study that will work hand in hand with our master plan, because I think we all recognize parking in this key commercial corridor plays a really critical role, and we want to make sure we're looking at it in the right way. We heard a lot of things about wayfinding and signage. Julie and John have been doing a lot of great work, and we'll be implementing this spring some new signage that helps us better identify our key assets in the commercial district, where to find parking, and all that good stuff. Infrastructure, we heard a lot about building more walkability, more bikeability. You'll see some big changes, for example, on Broadway and Page, as just one sort of low-hanging fruit example of the other opportunities we'd hope to look at throughout the corridor to make it a safer and a more welcoming place for people to walk. We heard a lot about traffic, and I think we're trying to look at this in a very multimodal way as a city. So we recently just implemented, and really Julie spearheaded, an effort to coordinate and modernize our traffic signals so they can better coordinate and communicate with one another. Because we know we do have to deal with the automobile on Broadway, even if we would like it to be a pedestrian-oriented place exclusively. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time, because we're also developing, in tandem with this work, a bicycle and pedestrian master plan to make sure that we're working to build a more walkable city and a more walkable Broadway. And we're also working with the MBTA on their Better Bus Network redesign, which is, if you're not familiar with it, an entire system-wide change in the way that buses operate throughout the MBTA community, where the most efficient and effective buses will be every 15 minutes, having regular coordinated ways to get people to and from. And actually, Broadway is the first phase in this 5-phase, region-wide effort. So we're at a really exciting moment with transportation as well. And then in terms of housing, we heard a lot of discussions about that, certainly at my table, table 6. The connections between housing, not just to provide places for people to live, but as an economic development driver to create the demand we need for a lot of what we want to see on storefronts. We're undergoing a housing production plan. We're a planning office. We do a lot of planning. But I think all of this stuff is really interconnected and building upon one another. And then finally, the public spaces. I think, David, when you first came here and walked along Broadway, you had mentioned that Broadway can feel relentless at times because there aren't those places to break things up. And Table 6 mentioned some really interesting ideas kind of right around Central Street where the pharmacies are, and an opportunity we have that's a really amazing chance to kind of break things up and break up the look and feel. And then finally, the aesthetics. So what you have in front of you, Gamble and Associates, along with their colleagues at Omloop, worked with Julie and John to put together design standards for storefront improvements. We're about to see over a dozen storefronts all along Broadway are going to undergo a pretty amazing transformation, which we hope to be the first in many steps that will really change and enhance the look and feel of the corridor. So a lot of really exciting stuff happening in kind of the short and medium term, but in the long term, again, this plan is a 10, 20-year effort. So what do we have to look forward to? I'm going to be just an endless drumbeat on this, but please take the survey. Please tell other folks in the community to take the survey, but also stay tuned for future opportunities to meet together as a community. We'll have a meeting before the final plan is published in the fall. And in advance of that, you'll see in the survey when you take it, and I think the last question will be opportunities to continue to stay engaged in this effort. And even if you don't take the survey, you've got John, Julie, and myself's contact information right here. We encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, comments, you have some feedback you wanted to share tonight that we didn't quite get to. We want this to be the start of a conversation, not the end of it. So please keep that in mind and continue to work with us. Together, I think we can build something pretty amazing on Broadway, and look forward to doing this work with you all. So thank you all again for coming.